Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Business, Bourbon, and Cigars. This is the podcast where we uncork the secret of leadership and growth. I'm your host, Scott Joseph, and today we have a guest who specializes in the power of words and clear communication. Joining us is Jonny Holsten. He's a messaging strategist and communication specialist. He's going to help, or he does help, leaders and organizations. See, this is why he's the perfect guest. I'm already struggling with my words. So he helps organizations find the right words for big moments, ensuring that they can engage their audience, inspire action, and cut through all the noise. He's here to share his expertise on how to communicate clearly so we lead with less confusion and fix unclear messaging. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Jonny.
Scott, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Man, I got to ask you right out of the gate. So first off, the show is called Business, Bourbon, and Cigars. So I know you check the bourbon or the business box.
Yes, sir.
You check the bourbon and the cigar box.
I'll check the cigar box when I'm golfing. So a couple times a month. And then the bourbon, I can get twisted into it here and there. So that's my answer. Yeah, I'll partake in the cigar tomorrow when I play golf with some buddies in your honor. So
very nice, very nice. Do you have a favorite cigar or type of cigar?
I don't. I wanted to just pretend that I do, but I'm good with a good $15, $10, $20 cigar. Nothing fancy is good for me.
So I think the problem when you have a show called Business, Bourbon, and Cigars, and we also have a couple leadership retreats each year that we do under the same name. I think people picture me at night constantly with the bourbon and constantly with the cigar. And I'm more like you. So socially, definitely when I'm golfing, I've got the cigar out. And then, if I'm out socially, I'll sip and nurse a nice neat pour or something good. So I enjoy that, but it's not, fortunately, I say that, it's not an everyday thing, but man, I think everybody thinks that's all I do. So,
hey,
I want to clear that up.
You're in good company here.
All right. So let me ask you real quick. I want our audience to get, a full understanding as to why they need to be listening to you on this. Right. And so I love where you're coming from. I know your background, but explain a little bit to the audience, your journey that led you to becoming a messaging strategist and communication specialist.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. So my journey is not too different than most business owners or entrepreneurs. Out after college, I've never worked for a company, never had a full-time traditional job. And that's obviously makes for some journeying and good stories probably. But I started after college in 2019, helping professional athletes and people with large followings with their brand deals. So if they had a social media deal come in, I'd help facilitate that between the client and the brand. And so started a little firm doing that with several clients, as well as doing some what I call random acts of marketing. So if someone needed a website, someone needed some marketing help, would help. So that's what my first business was. And in all of that was also, so the industry I was helping brand deals with was track and field, professional track and field. So I was also doing some broadcasting in that industry. And through all that experience, I noticed there were a lot of brands paying a lot of people a lot of money without giving, to post on social media or to endorse a product and not giving them any instruction on what to say in regards to that product. So I realized, some of these brands, even in an ideal partnership, were lighting their money on fire because they were letting an athlete who's not focused on the message post about it online. Same with websites. Companies will spend tens of thousands of dollars on a robust website and not put any thought into what it says, or not near enough thought into what it says. So that's what, got me started in messaging. And after focusing on that, I realized it's all I want to do. That was 3 years ago. And since then it's spread to messaging for any situation that's high stakes or important, helping brands and teams figure out what to say in those moments. So that's what led me here.
Well, and I brought up earlier, you're going to help us with, I guess, how to communicate and get something out in big moments. And you just mentioned high stakes messaging. So for you, like what qualifies for those moments, or,
Yeah.
What is big moments and high stakes?
Absolutely. The way I define it and the way I kind of figure out who's a good fit to work with me or a good project for me is where money is at stake or reputation is at stake. So that could be marketing and sales. That could also be vision casting for a CEO to an organization, maybe pitching a strategic plan or presenting a vision. So anytime there's money to be made or lost or reputation to be gained or lost, that's sort of where I link up with people and making sure that they say the right things in those moments to make the most of the opportunity.
So you mentioned your work with StoryBrand, right?
Yep.
You've done work with StoryBrand.
Yeah, so I'm a certified StoryBrand guide. I'm certified in their framework and have been for several years. And that's sort of the core of how I map out messaging.
So share with us, I guess, some of the key milestones or success stories that, in your opinion, would showcase your expertise in helping leaders, organizations, whatever it might be, clarify their message.
Yeah. Well, I'll give a high level of what an engagement looks like and then give some stories. So
perfect.
It's sort of a 3-step process. The first is you got to create the message. So messaging strategy, and that's finding the right words. That's mapping out your talking points. The next step is usually getting stakeholders trained and onboarded to that messaging. So anyone required to distribute that message needs to understand it. That's the second phase. The third part is then really enabling sales teams or marketing teams or whatever team is in the mix in that project to continue to carry it out successfully and apply the messaging to whatever avenue is appropriate. So a good recent success story that's a lot of fun was I had a CEO who was on a workshop with me at the end of last year, really got convicted on the idea that their messaging as a company was too self-centered, too focused on themselves, not focused enough on their audience.
So, I came from the auto industry, so I still have a lot of our audience that comes from that, right? So, and a good example of that be like, hey, we've been in business 30 years.
Yes, there's a time and place for that, but shouldn't be your primary message, right? We're a family owned, we're the biggest dealer, we're the this and that, right? So that was a lot of what they were struggling with. And this CEO came on, engaged with me in a workshop, had a great time, realized we need to be more audience centric. And so worked with their sales team on how to do that in sales messaging, and very quickly this is a big company, but small enough to where this deal mattered. And shortly after our work together, they brought in a $750,000 contract. So sometimes just some slight tweaks like that are great. Another example more internally was an executive I was working with at an educational institution. He had a very strong vision and desire for how the institution should move strategically. So we put together a framework, a StoryBrand framework, where he could talk about his vision for the institution to the executive team. So it wasn't a marketing and a sales message, but it was the same formula to help him speak to his fellow executives successfully. And so he went in there in the board meeting and crushed it, or in the boardroom and crushed that meeting. And it's stories like that are sort of the normal success stories in my line of work.
You know what I love about you being on this show is a couple things. So first off, I want to provide as much value to our audience, good content to where if they're watching, if they're listening, whatever it might be, they sit there and say, you know what, Jonny makes a lot of sense. This could help me here, and here. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there's a side benefit that when I first started doing podcasting, had nothing to do with why I did it. But as I started doing them, I was like, man, I'm learning a lot. So I learned just as much interviewing great guests as I do listening to podcasts, and probably more so because I'm more involved in the conversation, obviously. But I've read both books. So here's what I love about what you do. And what I mean both books is, so when we're talking about StoryBrand, the audience, not everybody in the audience may not know Donald Miller, who wrote those books and developed that brand, correct? But you're working through Donald. If I've got this right, you might be able to articulate this better.
Sure.
because this could qualify as a big moment or a high stakes messaging thing.
Yeah.
But as I read the books, I got it. As a business owner and leader, I get it conceptually.
Mm-hmm.
And in my head, as I'm reading, I'm like, yeah, I could do this. I could do this. And then it comes time to doing it. And I think sometimes business leaders and owners get so bogged down into what they're doing. And just so you know, what I was working on for was a marketing agency.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We're phenomenal at marketing for our clients. We follow all the right rules. We do all the right things. But when it comes to marketing ourselves, we are god awful. I mean, just awful.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting here and I'm just struggling, right? I'm like, so agencies like you, I think are perfect because I think there's a lot of business leaders, that may not have the time to sit there and do it from scratch and need just someone to guide them through that's been there, done that many times.
Yeah.
And just shorten that learning curve and more importantly, get it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Scott, you nailed it. Well, to explain the dynamic StoryBrand, how it works is I run my own business, but I'm certified with them. So they'll connect me to people who need their help or need help in the framework. And then I've been fortunate enough to work with the organization on supporting others who are certified in the framework and helping train them on the framework and helping provide help for them. But it's a licensing agreement, and they support me in giving continued training and helping get me get all the resources I need to do a great job for people. But you're so right. There's a few things you touched on that I think that I want to note is I do this all day, every day for a living for others. I hire others to help me with my own stuff. Because your IQ, I know there's a study out there. I can't cite it, but I do know it's a fact. Your brain power and your IQ drops when you're working on your own business. So that's just the reality. No matter how good you are at something, you need the outside perspective, right?
Well, then my business is in big trouble because I'm not starting.
Well, and that's the argument for bringing in others to help. Even if it is a couple hours of coaching or consulting, just having those checkpoints to get the new perspectives and the outside perspectives in. And I'm with you. I do a lot of stuff on my own too. So I'm with you there. That's bad news for guys like us.
Well, we're sitting here and we're going down this path of, it's easy to take what you're saying, all right, my messaging, how I communicate to my clients or prospects so they get a really good understanding of who we are, how we can benefit them. I want to be able to differentiate myself I want to make my competitors irrelevant, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a whole nother layer to all this. And you touch and you help with this as well. So how do you help leaders, or what can they do to get their point across effectively within their own organization? Because sometimes getting our vision out.
Yeah. Yep. It's the same principle. So to give a 30-second recap of the StoryBrand Framework to anyone listening it's the idea that good communication and good storytelling share common themes. It's the idea that any communication is basically guiding the audience to some kind of success. And in any story, it's the same story. You have a central character finding success through the help of a guide. Where a lot of people go wrong in their communication, marketing, sales, internal, is that typically the speaker positions themselves or the company as the central character. And really the central character should always be the audience, and the guide should always be the speaker, the brand, whoever's communicating. The reason there's actually some brain science involved in this. It's because the human brain is wired to think about things that are going to help, us survive selfishly. So even when you and I are talking here, Scott, like I might be thinking, how is this going to lead me to business growth? You're thinking the same thing. How is this going to lead me to become a well-known podcaster or grow my business in another way? Because the brain's wired to think for ourselves. So anytime we can position our communication to help others think about how, understand how our message will help them survive and thrive, that's the goal. So marketing does that, and internally, your communication should follow the same formula. That does not mean we can't be generous and we can't do great things for others, but it's sort of that underlying subconscious, almost caveman type DNA survival wiring that we have. So there's the background on the framework. How it works internally then is the same idea. Like in marketing, your brand should be the guide. A CEO should be the guide for his people. And so let's say he has a strategy to present or a vision to cast. The difference is between how a lot of people would just go about it and they'd say, here's our strategic plan, here's our vision, here's what I want to say, and then they'd say it. How it usually looks differently when I work with someone would be, hey, what do you want to say? What's on your mind? What do you need to communicate? Now, how can we take that same information, but instead make it connect to the problems that the audience is experiencing? So to use a simple analogy, let's say you're casting a strategic plan for 3 to 5 years, or even a 1-year strategic plan. A CEO is often going to be inclined to say, if we follow this strategic plan, we are going to hit this revenue and we are going to capture this market share. What I would challenge others to do is that makes the company the hero and the central character in a story. The hard work that a leader should do or a CEO should do in this scenario is instead say, if we follow this strategic plan, they don't have to change the plan, but connect that plan to a problem the organization and the people with the feet on the ground are experiencing. So it might be you, the people who are running this organization, are going to get to work on better quality work or and more enjoyable projects. Your day-to-day is going to be better because of X, Y, Z when we follow this plan. That's the real difference right there. Because if you do that, think about the engagement from the people and the skin in the game that they have to follow your plan. There's an example of how it works internally outside of marketing.
Well, and in most organizations, you're going to involve your team in that plan too. So you've got this buy-in, but to your point, now it's being communicated to everyone, and it's a much more effective way to get people bought into the vision.
Absolutely. And you might even have your team help you relay that message. If you have an annual conference or quarterly all hands, you divvy it up so there's even more guides involved.
And it's amazing. We literally just finished. I traveled back yesterday from our Business Bourbon and Cigars leadership retreat. Communication was something literally on all of our mastermind sessions, because we do these breakout sessions, and then our panel discussions. Communication came up every single time. And we always talk about getting everybody rowing in the right direction or in the same direction, because it obviously makes things much easier.
I'd love to know what sort of things were coming up.
Well, let's just say this. When we have a plan that everybody gets behind, a lot of times when it's not communicated effectively and repeatedly, and we don't always communicate effectively who's responsible. I mean, communication can follow a lot of different things. You just gave a great example of how to communicate what the strategy is going to be and why and more importantly, the why it's important, how it's going to work, right? But at the same time, how often and frequently are we communicating with people to make sure everything's on pace and who's responsible for what? And then to take that a step further to what you're saying, if we're talking about how frequently we're going to communicate and to who and what they're responsible for, how are we communicating to make sure it actually gets done and they're excited about doing it?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think you're layering in. We talked a lot about what to do. What I love about what you're teaching is how to do it and then the why behind what's, to make it more effective.
Yeah. So I imagine a lot of what you guys talked about was, hey, well, regular meetings, regular check-ins, consistency.
Exactly.
And so where my work comes in is, hey, how often are you going to talk to your people? What sentences need to be said every time you talk to them? So you're right on the right track there. I'm sure you took great care of people in those brainstorms and the panels and the masterminds, because you're right. It's a relevant challenge.
I need to get you at these.
Let's do a workshop or something for the next one. I'll be happy to help. Yeah.
Well, because it comes up every time. Like I can think of a couple retreats a while back where we got in on the topic. One of the things was like new technology. You'll love this. a repeated challenge that a lot of organizations face is, oh, we'll never get our people to do that. We can't get our people to do that. Well, part of the problem we can't get our people to do it, if I'm listening to you, the first thing that's running through my head is it's probably how we're communicating to them. You know, they don't feel they're part of the solution. They're not excited about that.
100%. And for the example of like rolling out a new tech, it's probably that people don't understand how that tech is going to help them. They don't understand the process of adoption, or like a good example would be there's too many steps to adopt the tech that could be combined into a simple 3 or 4 step process rather than an 11 step process. Things like that can help. So yeah, you're on the money with that.
And I can also imagine, I'm picturing a leader communicating. Man, I look back in the early days of my career. I had to be horrible. I'm like, how in the heck did I build anything? But I think because accountability, building a culture of accountability, has to start from the top. And so I'm picturing, if you're a leader, all right, and you're in charge, you're responsible, I should say, for leading this team. Could be from CEO to the executive team, or it could be somebody on the executive team to the people that report or they work with closely and on down as it filters or cascades. 2 things have to happen. Obviously, you have to hold yourself accountable. But at the same time, I'm imagining how this could go south if you've got that leader where the actions don't always live up to the words, and then you're using the wrong words at the same time. I could see how that cascades or spirals in the wrong direction very quickly, and why projects probably don't get finished out.
Amen. Or finished well, or even off the ground. I think there's a friend of mine who's an executive coach for I don't know, execs, right? Like pretty high level executives. And he says, we were talking a few weeks ago, and he was like, hey, at the end of the day, you might have the message perfect, but the hardest part of messaging is having the discipline to actually say what you're supposed to say when it matters the most. So at the end of the day, that's kind of the third phase of anything we do is like, hey, I might actually sit in on a presentation, because if you're going to say this 10 times this year, you might say it kind of wrong the first time, but the second, third, fourth, fifth, we're going to get it right. And by the time you master it, you're going to get good at always saying it correctly. But you're right. It's a compounding effect. If actions don't align, and then also messaging doesn't align, good luck getting anybody bought in. And that's why when an organization has done that for years, and then they finally want to get it right, it can take years to even earn the trust of the people that you're talking to, right? Which I see you resonating with this. So you can't do it once. It's not a flavor of the month type thing. It's a same flavor every month type thing. You get it right.
If your actions didn't match your words, or you're not communicating it correctly, usually employees will wait it out and the new idea comes along, and then they start working on that and then don't complete it. So if you all of a sudden you start doing everything right, well, you got to rebuild trust, because really what you're talking about is a breakdown in trust, and that can send things south quick. Let's share a story with the audience of a leader who did transform their messaging, right? From unclear to compelling.
Yeah, I think probably the best ones that come to mind for me are is that one I talked about earlier, where it started at the executive marketing level and then it went into the sales and leads to sales, leads to income, leads to revenue. I think the best example, another example is a big property management company that I've worked with. So they again started at leadership level. They were like, hey, this concept of playing the guide is super powerful. We're going to do it in our marketing, yes, but we're also going to make sure everyone that's on the ground in every property and community we manage, it's basically a core value of theirs now. Huge company. Everybody's going to play the guide. So think about how transformational that is for an organization, top to bottom. So for me, I really believe the best transformation is making this concept of playing the guide a core value, as corny as that can sound to some people, because that's how you take it top to bottom, right?
Yeah, I love that. Let me ask you this question. We all have our team meetings and company-wide meetings where there's going to have to be a section in it or a segment in the meeting where we're talking about something that we know it's boring as hell.
Yeah.
No one wants to listen to it, whether it's monotonous, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So how do we take a boring topic, all right, and make it more engaging in our messaging?
Great question. And this is a good one, like for HR or for HR is a good example, right? HR, you got to talk about something boring. A good example that I've done in the past is like, think about company benefits. Boring. You don't want to talk about company benefits. The best way to make a boring subject interesting is to connect it to some kind of problem. So much like casting a vision, tying it to your company's problem, you've got to be crafty and you've got to take that thing that's boring as hell and connect it to a problem. So an example could be, hey, our employees are complaining about our benefits package sucking, right? The way to make that talking point let's look at it this way. You have an executive team. They're in a boardroom. They're hearing employees saying, hey, our benefits suck. We don't get X, Y, Z. And this executive team is saying, what are you talking about? You do get all these things. So rather than standing up there and saying, hey guys, we're going to recap our benefits. We just emailed you a recap of your benefits. Go check that out. And that being a boring talking point, what that needs to look like at the next meeting, the next all hands, is someone from HR needs to stand up and say, hey guys, it's come to our attention that a lot of you are spending your own money on health and wellness perks that the company will pay for. So now the audience is engaged and they're like, wait a minute, I'm wasting money. And that tees up this HR person to then say, you may not know this, but in our benefits package, we'll pay for your gym. We'll pay for massage. We'll pay for this and that, right? Or maybe it's not those things. It could be other things. So that's an opportunity where instead of saying, hey, you guys don't understand your benefits, we just emailed you a one-pager. Now you lead with the problem. You earn the attention of your audience. That's how I would, that's the boring way. That's the way to spice up a boring message.
Isn't it? So it's very similar. Like if I was going to run, let's just say I want to run a Facebook ad. Mm-hmm. I don't lead with, hello, I'm Scott Joseph. Mm-hmm. And I start away with, hey, when I was this old, or whatever, back in this date, I had this situation happen, right? I hit it because you got 3 seconds.
Yes.
You got to grab attention, right? So what you're saying, and I love this because we started off this show kind of talking about clear messaging and the importance of it from a marketing standpoint. And we'll probably swing back a little bit to that in a second, but you're following, we're human beings. So what gets me from a marketing message is going to be the same when I'm communicating. That's how I'm hearing you.
Amen. Amen. It's the same thing. You're still marketing a message to an audience. It's just the difference is the audience is your employees versus the audience is a customer. There are differences. It's the same principle. At the end of the day, every message we have, whether it's verbal or a typed out message, we're competing with the TikTok in the pockets of our audience or any other distraction. So whether it's an HR message or a marketing message, we've got to win the attention in that battle. Our words have to be more important than whatever distraction the audience could lean into. And as we all know, there's an endless list.
Yeah. So every organization at some point has got to deliver bad news.
Yeah.
We lost a key client. It's going to import, or we just got this great, let's take good news and turn it into how some employees might feel like it could be bad in the sense that we just got this huge deal, but guess what? It's coming in last second. And
we need some.
Now we got to get it done. We got to do what it takes to get it done. Yeah. You've got those type of situations. You could have economic. You could have, the easiest example probably happened 3 years ago with COVID, where people were either having to do furloughs, layoffs, things such as that. So what's your advice on handling those type of situations with grace and clarity?
Yeah, great question. The grace part's key. So part of playing the guide is you have a mixture of empathy and authority. So sometimes you need more of the empathy drum sometimes to bang. Sometimes you need more of the authority drum. In breaking bad news or presenting bad news, you got to go heavy on the empathy. So as much empathy as you can authentically show. That's where you have these corporate big fails where people are recording the CEO saying something and it comes across so disingenuous. It's because they don't truly feel that empathy. So if you're communicating this, you need to ask yourself, how do I feel sorry for these people? How do I empathize with these people? Start with that. Lead with empathy. Then that should buy you some of that, I guess, social or relational credit to start to get to the meat of the issue and go from there. Just like with boring news, connecting whatever's going on to a problem, a real and relevant problem, is important. As far as bad news, highlighting the stakes, the good things. Now, remember, it has to be the appropriate setting. So if you're laying off people, you may not go this route. But if you're saying, hey, this bad thing happened, or we are changing this thing about our process, highlighting the good things that will come of it in the future and the bad things that could have happened if there had not been a change. So just the reality of the good things to come, even though it's hard to see, and then the bad things that were avoided by this change. I think that's something that is often overlooked. But when people aren't met with grace, like you said, grace and empathy, no one wants to hear the rest of it. So it can be as simple as, hey, the first touch point with the organization is all empathy. We're going to deliver some news. It's all empathy. And then tomorrow we're going to have another sync up and we're going to talk about the rest of these things. Like, there are ways to make it more successful in that situation. So those are my talking points in that scenario.
Well, what I love about you is when we ask these questions, our audience, you're given very specific examples, and our audience should be able to walk away from this saying, yeah, all right. I know how to hold this meeting. I know how to talk about this. I know how to do this now. And I love when we bring that type of value to it. So let's go the other direction in this sense. We've talked a lot about the positive side. What are some of the misconceptions or mistakes about clear communication as it relates to leadership do you see?
Man, that's a good question.
Once you tell me I ask a good question, I'm gonna say, if I ask a question and you don't say that, I'm gonna assume it was a bad one.
No, yeah, it's because you're asking a lot of good questions. So you sent me a whole list of good questions first, so I made sure to vet that. I would have told you if they were bad ones. I won't say. I won't. This is a good question. Give me a level. Go a level deeper for it. Like, what are you picturing when you think of a misconception with?
Yeah. So good question. All right. So there are sometimes people who have beliefs about how they communicate. Some people might have a misconception that, all right, we don't want our employees to know. We just talked about bad news. Let's take that.
Sure.
We don't want employees knowing that John's leaving. We don't want to know, I know there's HR legalities to if someone leaves, or if, let's say, you got to terminate somebody, you got to let somebody go. You don't always want to go into those details, but at the same time, especially if it's somebody that's been with the organization or was important to the organization for a long period of time, and it just is no longer the right fit. It could be just, I think some leaders feel like no communication is better than something. I think that's a misconception, because listen, the employees are going to be communicating whether you say something or not. So how do you, that might be an example.
Yeah. How I view that one is, hey, in a situation where you are not sure what to do and you're not sure what to say, it's almost like in sales, you need to let the prospect situation guide your message. So it's going to be custom messaging for each prospect in a sales analogy. But for internal leadership comms, it would be, hey, I don't know what to say. You might meet with your lead. Let's say your CEO, you're meet with your other leaders and say, what are people saying? What questions do people have? And then you craft your message around that. I think to tie it back to your question about misconceptions, certainly anyone who's a leader and has leadership traits loves to, even if you're an introvert, you love delivering a compelling message that fires people up. You always want, the best ones always want to master their message and crush a moment in the spotlight. Whether that is a sad thing, laying people off, parting ways with a partner, or you're announcing bonuses at the end of the year. You want to be that person. I think the misconception is sometimes we feel like we have to be that person without any help, and we have to be that person automatically, when it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of attention to detail. So in a situation like you just described, my thinking would be learn as much info as you can about the organization, the culture, the temperature, the pulse based on the subject that you need to talk about. Let those things guide your message so you can make it centric to the audience. That way you don't come out swinging with something that you feel is important. The other misconception is people often just feel like what's important to them is important to everybody. And the savviest communicators can still say what they need to say in a way that is important to others. Even if it's, the boardroom talking about boardroom things, how can you convert that message into something that's not that for others? That's the craftiest communication. So to summarize, the two misconceptions are that you have to crush it on your own and get out there and wing it without any help. The other is that, oh my gosh, I just lost my talking point because I was rambling. But the other one is,
well, I'll say this. It's so funny because we've talked a lot about different things that apply to so many things. We're talking about a lot of internal communication and how leaders can get people on rowing in the same direction. But a lot of everything you just said works with our external communication to clients and prospects, grabbing attention out of the gate, keeping them engaged, things such as that. And where I was going with this is you just made a comment, you don't have to do it alone. And so for the first half, and people in the audience have heard me say this many times, one of my regrets is, and I've been in business now 33 years on my own. I started when I was only 10. No. But one of the biggest regrets I have, our tagline in my agency was move the crowd, crush the competition, count the money. It was so isolated about like, we're going to do it all by ourselves. We need no help from no one. Yeah. And so what you said from an internal thing applies externally as well. Yeah. We don't have to learn everything or do it. There are so many people out there who have been there, done that, have made the mistakes, or have achieved such high levels of success. And so it doesn't matter if you're just communicating to someone, trying to scale your business, trying to find a better way to market yourself. Yeah. The world is filled with people that want to help you. But if you isolate and you don't ask for it or look for it, and I really, quite honestly, I think it starts with not necessarily looking to help yourself as much as I find the more I just genuinely want to help someone and help them without doing it for the reason knowing it's going to come back, but start from the right place, man, the universe works, man, and that just comes back in big ways. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't. And I remembered the thought that slipped from my mind. So you don't have to do it alone. And then also, not everyone cares about the same things you care about. Those were the two misconceptions. But you're so right. You're so right, Scott. I think we want to do things on our own because we sometimes feel asking others for help show this, this can go a lot of ways. It can show that we're weak, right? Like, I think
we don't want to show how dumb we are.
We don't because we're all dumb, right? We're all, at the end of the day, we're all dumb. And we don't want that to be seen. But whether that's a person in your organization, maybe it's like there's a confidentiality to something. So if a CEO is going to talk about firing a C-level exec, there needs to be external confidentiality to process that message. But if it's something on internal side, hey, find that person in your organization that is your person. And we all know if we work with others who that person is, right? Or even if you run your own business and you're in a group of other business owners and you know that person, that you know who I'm talking about, that you can go to and just say anything to. That's where to go when you feel like you're not sure what to say. So sometimes it's a formal consultant, but really it can also be anyone with a listening ear that's wise and gives good advice. You don't have to do it alone. Messaging is no different. And asking for help is as simple as saying, hey, I don't know what to say here.
Yeah. All right. I want to switch this back now to marketing our businesses, communicating to clients and prospects. We started off with that. And I think everything you said on the internal side applies to that. We were surface level at the beginning when we talked about high stakes messaging, big moment type stuff when you said either money or reputation. And you obviously having a clear message that benefits the consumer. But I want to drill down now. All right. I want to drill down in the sense that there's so much noise out there. And especially if you sell what the marketplace is, I like saying, painted you into a commodity corner.
Yeah.
All right. Where you're perceived as a commodity and the marketplace wants that because commodities become less expensive, right? Than versus something that's unique. So talk to us about what clear communication means. What does that look like? How do we get that out there so we can rise above all this noise and really differentiate our businesses from everybody else?
I think the first few boxes you got to check is you've got to be super clear on what you're selling and who you're selling it to. We don't need to go into much detail there, but those are the prereqs. The next part is you've got to be able to talk to that person about their problems better than they can even articulate them themselves. That's, the next step. I'll go a little deeper on that. The next two, the way to do that is talk about the external problem. So what's actually happening to that person that's creating a problem. The next layer is what internal emotions are they feeling from that problem. So you got to do that well. And then in terms of positioning your brand as the one to go with, even in a commodified industry where the prices are going down, the question I always ask my clients is there anything you do like that is yours and yours only? So I think the two ways to stand out is you go, and there's two ways to do it. You either identify something that nobody else is doing, like nobody, even if you're in a commodity space, find something that no one else is doing. That way you're not saying we're the best at XYZ. You're saying we're the only at XYZ. Yeah. That's the first way to do it. And then, or that's, one important way to do it. And then the other thing is I always think in like consulting, so this is less commodity based, but stuff like consulting and process work, I always like to ask, what are you doing behind the scenes? Because a lot of times there's a marketable message that goes on underneath the hood of an organization that is not being leveraged. And so customers don't fully understand what it looks like to engage with you because you're taking things for granted behind the scenes. So you need to dig those things up to stand out. And those are the first, places that I always go when digging into that.
I love what you just said, finding the one thing that you might do that no one else does. And I find, but it's got to come from a genuine belief. You can't just do it for the sake of manipulation, right? Yep. If I've got something that I know no one else has, I don't always point that out as much as I say or communicate. Now it's much easier in a selling pitch because I got unlimited words and I can use my body language. And so I think the challenge is on the marketing side is making it clear. That's where you come in. But I want to get across to that person that you're trying to reach this or avoid this, whatever it might be, this is the one thing that if you had that, that is the only way to achieve this or avoid that because of this, and this. Those things will do this, but none of that happens without this, which is the one unique thing that you might have, right?
Yeah.
That's got to be real. It's got to, I can't just make it up.
Yeah. Yes.
But when that happens and you can get someone bought in on that, how do they choose anybody else?
And that's where you want to get. And like you just said, it's got to be real. You cannot BS your way into a marketing message because people are too smart. And I refuse to work with anyone that's like, it makes no sense to do that, right? It's not right. It's not cool. The way to, I think, really dig that up is you look under the hood, you figure out what you do different than anybody else. And then like a great example of this, I read actually this morning. There's a book called No BS Strategy by Alex Smith. It's a short little book. It talks about a lot of these things we just talked about. And he talks about how I believe it's Kind Bar. He kept them anonymous, but my suspicion is it's Kind Bar, the little granola bar, right, in the store. So when they first started, they were like the healthiest snack bar in the world. And over time, they realized they were getting less and less healthy because there were more and more people entering the market space that were healthier than them. Yeah. So rather than trying to stand out as a healthy snack bar, what did they do? They put themselves on the shelf space next to the Reese's and next to the Snickers and next to the Skittles. And so all of a sudden, they didn't even have to change a thing about what they did. It was purely authentic. It was honest. They didn't change a thing about their product. All they did was put themselves in a category where people were no longer thinking about comparing a Nature Valley bar to a Kind Bar. They were thinking about Reese's and Kind Bar. And there's a clear difference there. So Correct. Sometimes it goes back to even changing what you say. Maybe you're saying all the right things, but you're saying it to the wrong person. That's a thought that happens as well too. Sometimes I'll work with someone who will be like, hey, you're saying a ton of great, like this is good stuff, but where are you putting it? Oh, we're mass emailing 1 billion people when what you need to do is put it in a workshop.
What a great, that's a great example. When you're saying that, I'm sitting there literally going through my head because I'll have very healthy, like protein bars, low sugar, stuff like that. And I don't eat them daily, but some days you don't have time to break away. And that's what I go to.
Yep.
But there was at some point I stopped ever eating Kind bars from a health standpoint, because I knew it wasn't really that healthy.
Sure.
And I was looking at it and I was like, now, however, if I'm going through the airport and I'm not on like all this, and I'm like, all right, if I'm going to eat, there's a choice of Snickers, Reese's, or Kind, I'm going Kind all day long because it tastes good. And I know it's healthier.
It certainly is healthier. Yeah, it's absolutely healthier. Yeah. I'm glad that resonated because I read that today and I was like, you know what? You're right. And he gave the other example of the Method Men, the body wash and shampoo. They made it look minimalist and healthier, even though it's probably not. And it really stands out. So there were other examples like that, but good analogy to talk through today.
All right. I got a couple questions. And I think this one will hit home with a lot of people. Like because everybody thinks their challenge is the biggest. What's the biggest communication challenge or challenging communication problem, we'll say, that you've encountered in your work? And then how did you solve it?
With my work personally or communication in general?
You can take it either way because I think I think the audience would want to hear. I think the audience would hear one of two scenarios, either where you had a client that this was a major communication, a challenge or a problem. So they'd love to hear the process on how you work through that, or you got your own internal stuff where you're struggling, probably like any other CEO, right? And then same thing. How did you work? What was the process that got you through that?
Yeah. Well, I'll go under the hood of my own business because it's a process of a struggle my customers were having that I was able to turn into kind of a product, so it's a double whammy here. But My start, like I said, was in marketing. So in the early and the initial part of messaging and communications is like, I joke, everyone and their cousin is a digital marketer that makes websites, right? So that's where we all started. That's where it feels like every entrepreneur starts. I stumbled into the training and the facilitation side of things because I would create a marketing message. I would turn it into language for a website. And what I would do is present it to the client in like a pretty expanded experiential presentation. And I realized people were coming back to me saying like, hey, the best part of our engagement was the 30 minutes on Zoom at the end of it. Like the messaging was great, but the best part was what it did for our team when they learned about how to use it and what to use it. So I realized the biggest challenge in communication is oftentimes creating the message, but also getting people to wrap their minds around it and how to use it, and then staying disciplined and focused on following it. So that's the three parts of it. I realized I stumbled into it because people kept saying like, oh my gosh, that 30 minutes on Zoom was worth twice of what the whole project cost us. And I learned quickly, hey, if you solve the message and you get it clear, great. You've only solved the first step. The next step is training people on it, then holding them accountable and disciplined. So that was the challenge. That's the challenge for clients, because a lot of clients would have, I'd work with them on a marketing message, but
that's the challenge. That's a challenge for every business.
Yeah. And so that solved a big thing for me. When you talk about like putting yourself in an only category, I'm sure there's someone in the world that does the same thing I do. But in my lane, I don't know anyone who does the strategy, the training, and the implementation, the enablement of teams specifically. So that was a communication issue for a lot of clients that it's been so great to go back to them and say, hey, I know we worked on your marketing message X amount of months ago or years ago, and now we can help on-ramp your whole organization on how to use it and stick with you to make sure they follow it and continue support and training.
Well, even if you've got, it's so critical for so many different reasons. You can't be highly successful with a marketing message that says this and a sales message that says that.
Yeah.
There's a disconnect. And quite honestly, when everyone doesn't buy in and understand not only I think when you're teaching them how to use it, it also resonates better on why it's so important, not only to the organization, but to our clients. So I think it makes it easier for the team to buy in, and more importantly, to execute on living up to your brand promise.
Yes.
Because if clearly I would assume whatever marketing messages you're coming up, they have to align obviously with whatever that brand promise is in some way. So to me, I'm just thinking about when you onboard new employees and things such that we don't always do the best job of communicating the message and all that, right?
Absolutely. That is part of the process. So whether it's a recorded training that's part of an onboarding curriculum that we do, or it's, hey, every quarter, we're going to do another training for the most recent new hires. That's the type of stuff that makes the message stick. And when you think about brand promise, when we talk about external problems and internal problems, the next step that I ask every client is, what's your philosophical approach about the injustice of this problem? So why do you believe it should be solved? I've had multiple clients turn into, they cry when you talk about this part, because that's your brand promise. So teaching those things and making it known in your message is huge. And making sure everyone carries it out is just part of it.
See, I always know I have a good guest, a good interview when the audience is probably sitting there saying, well, we know what Scott's problems are. He's asking all these questions. Looks like he's helping himself. But I think everybody thinks that everyone's like them. So I just assume everyone's got the same struggles and challenges as I do, right? But I talk to a lot of different business leaders, because that is what we do with Me Plus Ultra and within our communities. And so I just hear the repeated challenges and repeated, things that we go through. And so this was a topic in an interview I really looked forward to doing, because I felt like it could help a lot of people, including myself. So let's do this finally. What advice do you have for our audience who aspire to become more effective communicators and leaders in their respective fields? I will leave that wide open for you.
Yeah. The first thing really is, hey, go read the book, Building a Story Brand, and think through it through the lens of, yes, your marketing and sales, but also the internal marketing and internal selling you need to do to the people that follow you as a leader. That's step one. And the other thing is, hey, don't get stuck on perfection. That's the oftentimes my job or the job of someone next to you. You get as far as you can go. Bring someone else in to yay or nay it. Don't get stuck on perfection. That's the other thing.
That is a great advice. That's a wrap for today's episode of Business, Bourbon, and Cigars. A big thank you to our guest, Jonny Holsten, for sharing his insights on the importance of clear communication and leadership. If you found this episode valuable, I want you to visit Jonny's website at southmountainmessaging.com. There has got to be leaders in our audience that are sitting there thinking, gosh, especially that last part where you kind of outlined, we lay this out, we go over it, and then we can kind of train on it. I'm sitting here thinking, that's all I want. I read the book, I liked it, but I need help, somebody helping me do it. But visit southmountainmessaging.com so you can learn more about his work and how he can help you transform your messaging.
Hey, Scott.
Remember,
can I interrupt you? I'm sorry to interrupt.
100%. Bring it.
I want to mention this, a quarterly workshop. It's completely free. The next one's June 6th. So they're every quarter. I just did Q1. So if you go to the website, you'll see a page to register for that. It's a 90-minute workshop. We help leaders and teams find the right words for their big moments. They will leave with a compelling message and their core talking points in 90 minutes. So that's an opportunity to get started on this. I hate to interrupt your outro.
No, when is the next one again?
June 6th.
June 6th.
And we can Master Your Message. You'll see the link on the website. Quarterly
Master Your Message.
Yep.
That's a very good, clear thing. But you can find that all on southmountainmessaging.com. So remember to subscribe to our podcast here, Business, Bourbon, and Cigars. Leave a review. Rate it. We especially like the 5-star ones with the very kind words. However, we love all reviews because that's how we improve. So we actually read them and pay attention to them. And please share this episode and others with your network. Join us next time as we continue to uncover the secrets of leadership, growth, and innovation. Until then, keep thriving and stay inspired. Cheers, everyone.